And I really appreciate your time. To begin with, your initial reaction, Pakistan's army chief who threatened to take half the world down if Pakistan goes down. What do you have to make of this nuclear rhetoric made on American soil?
Well, I think that that's an important distinction. I'm not surprised that Pakistani officials are engaging in saber rattling and, playing the nuclear threat card. We've heard that before. What we had not heard before is this sort of nuclear threat from American soil. And if this was the only incident, I would find it rather unremarkable. But what we are currently witnessing is a trend where it appears that this second Trump administration is tilting towards Pakistan and away from India. We've actually seen it throughout the course of this whole summer. I think that a key turning point was Operation Sindoor, where the Trump administration India-Pakistan conflict as if those two countries are on equal footing, on equal terms with the United States, and that the conflict itself is, that no one party is more culpable than the other, when of course the entire conflict was set off by Pakistan-backed terrorists killing large numbers of Hindu civilians. And then the Trump administration came in and claimed credit for reducing the conflict. And the Pakistan was very, very happy with the Trump administration's interventions. They did some personal dealings. They talked very publicly about recommending Trump for the Nobel Prize. And it was really at that time, a few months ago in May, that I began to see this shift from the administration away from India in the direction of Pakistan. I don't see these as independent data points. I see them as part of a worrying trend.
Let's just dig a little deeper. What message does U.S.'s inaction send to allies and adversaries when, when the U.S. is providing a platform of sorts without any consequences to what the general has said?
I do think that the United States needs to be mindful about being consistent in terms of supporting our allies and not, showing too much warmth to adversaries, including adversaries of our allies and countries that support Islamist extremism and terrorism regionally and around the world. I don't fully understand, to be honest, what this administration is doing with respect to India, because U.S.-India relations are the product of a tremendous amount of effort and investment. And the administration, before it was elected, in the campaign season, attached a lot of importance to the U.S.-India relations with all sorts of projections about the amount of trade between the two countries, discussion of deepening military ties, both bilaterally and through the Quad, and the overall focus of U.S. grand strategy, which we were told is to contain China in the Pacific. And the pillar of U.S. containment of China in the Pacific, we were told, was a strong U.S.-India relationship. And so I projected that U.S.-India relations under the second Trump administration would actually get stronger, not weaker. So it's a bit confusing. Simultaneously, Japan also is a longtime U.S. ally. I mean, not from the very beginning, of course. There's a history there of war, but after World War II, Japan became increasingly an important ally, does a lot of trade with the United States, was seen as a bulwark against Chinese expansion. And U.S. tariff policy to Japan is also seen as very unfair, offensive, and destabilizing to that bilateral relationship as well. And so I don't really understand why, given the supposed importance the Trump administration attaches to containing China, why the U.S. is then weakening our key allies in the region, especially in the Indo-Pacific and India.
Now, Max, you did mention about, the shift that we saw from February to the summer in viewing India as a strategic ally at one point to Trump's most skeptical stance on India. How do you see this all play out in the days ahead?
Well, what we've seen out of President Trump is that sometimes he very rapidly, even instantaneously, changes his rhetoric and overall positions towards the country. We've seen that many times with respect to how Trump talks about Putin and ending the conflict, the Russia conflict in Ukraine. So it is possible that Trump planning, or maybe it's not even planned and he'll just end up massively alleviating the threatened tariffs against India. That I would not rule that out. That is very possible, knowing this administration and how sudden and unpredictable it can be, especially over tariff policy. So it wouldn't shock me especially if there is some progress in that big Alaska meeting between Trump and Putin. If the U.S. alleviated that 25% tariff on Indian purchasing of Russian oil, I am at least hopeful that the U.S. and India will right this course, because I think that India is too important to the United States for there to be any kind of a permanent bump in the relationship. I will say, however, that even if some of the tariffs, a substantial amount of the tariffs, like that 25% I mentioned, are lifted, I still think that the U.S.-India relationship may not fully recover for quite some time under this administration, because the message to India is that the United States isn't reliable. And that is happening at the same time that the U.S. is inviting the Army Chief of Staff of Pakistan for high-level meetings, including with the president in the United States, where Pakistan's tariffs are among the lowest in the region and much lower than India's, where there's talk of enhanced trade. One of the terrorist groups inside of Pakistan has recently been now listed as a foreign terrorist organization. And so there are all sorts of data points which suggest that there has been a tilt away from India, even beyond just the tariffs. And for that reason, I don't know that the Indian public and Indian officials will count on the United States in the same way as it did, say, 6 months ago.
Now, after Operation Sindoor, after a week, we heard President Trump saying that he had brokered peace between the two nations, while the government of India has a different version of this. What is your impression of this whole operation and how it played out, and the versions that we hear from both sides?
Well, I was not party to the high level interference by or involvement by the Trump administration into that conflict. So I cannot really say with any level of confidence exactly what the Trump administration's role was. What I do know, and which the general public knows as well, is that President Trump claimed a lot of personal responsibility for the end of that conflict, for the cessation of, military blows by both India and Pakistan. And I also know that Pakistan became very vocally supportive of the US role and recommended a Nobel Prize for Trump, whereas India really chafed at the level of US involvement, and especially Trump claiming so much credit for the course of that short war. I think that it demonstrates a lack of expertise in terms of understanding how not to act towards India. I think that India feels like it's not being fully respected, and that the Trump administration doesn't fully appreciate its contributions, and also doesn't really regard India as a fully independent country on the world stage, even though it's the largest democracy in the world with the largest population and soon will be the third largest economy. So I don't think that the Trump administration knows how to speak about India or to India in the most productive way.
And finally, Max, U.S.-India relations at this point are at the rock bottom. How do you see this in the larger scheme of things in the region and, of course, in the Indo-Pacific, countering China?
Well, I think that we need to be a little bit patient in terms of the meetings between Trump and Putin. In a weird way, that war in Russia is connected to U.S.-India relations, because a lot of the current problem from the perspective of Washington is the Indian purchasing of Russian oil, which fuels the war in Ukraine. I think that I'm certainly hoping for some kind of a breakthrough in those conversations. And if so, I believe that will improve, that'll set the US and India back on the correct course. I'm also paying attention not just to the tariffs, but to the Quad relationship between the US, India, Japan, and Australia. That alliance is seen as very important for counterbalancing against China. Its viability, or at least its strength, has been cast in doubt by this turn for the worse in US-India relations, as well as the conflict between US and Japan. But, the China threat isn't going away. And the United States, especially under this administration, sees China as a threat that needs to be contained. And that is going to require the US to mend relations with allies in the Indo-Pacific region. And so in that sense, I have to be optimistic moving forward. And On top of that, we live in a globalized world. And if something's bad for the Indian economy, it's also not good for the US economy. I do not see, the global economic system in zero-sum terms. And so it is actually in the US interest for Indian economic growth to continue apace. That is a very basic concept, which I think is poorly understood by elements within the Trump administration, which sometimes go by, this concept of America first. They think America could essentially seal itself off from the rest of the world, become more economically independent, or constantly push for asymmetry in trade relations. But that's a dangerous path to go down. It can have not just a negative effect on the financial system, but also in terms of military ties.